The more the sea pounds against it, the more these beneficial minerals form, making it stronger. The concrete is literally building itself stronger with each passing century. Compare that to modern structures. Concrete exposed to seawater typically begins to deteriorate within 20 to 30 years. The salt accelerates rebar corrosion, and the structure enters a state of progressive collapse. Roman concrete, on the other hand, thrives 2,000 years later, becoming more robust with each century. These structures all share a common ingredient: opus cementitium, Roman concrete. For a long time, the secret was believed to be a special volcanic ash called pozzolana. The Romans mixed this ash with lime to create a binder that was incredibly stable and water-resistant. This pozzolanic reaction was key, but it wasn't the whole story. It couldn't explain everything, particularly a strange anomaly found in every sample of Roman concrete: millions of tiny, bright white chunks scattered throughout the material. For decades, scientists dismissed these lime clasts as a sign of sloppy mixing, a defect. But for some researchers, that explanation just didn't add up. Admir Mazik, a materials scientist at MIT, posed a simple but profound question. If the Romans put so much effort into creating this remarkable material, why would they be so consistently careless? It didn't make sense. He decided to investigate these supposed flaws, not as a mistake, but as a clue. What if they were intentional? Using advanced imaging, Mazik and his team analyzed 2,000-year-old concrete from an archaeological site in Italy. They weren't just looking at the material, they were zooming down to the nanoscale to understand the exact chemistry of these little white chunks. What they found was transformative. The structure of the lime clasts suggested they had been formed at extremely high temperatures. This went against everything we thought we knew. The standard theory was that Romans made concrete with slaked lime pre-mixed with water into a safe paste. But the evidence pointed to a far more extreme process called hot mixing. The researchers realized the Romans were likely adding quicklime, a more volatile, unslaked form of calcium oxide, directly into the mix with the ash and rock, then adding water. The chemical reaction would have occurred inside the concrete itself, generating immense heat, reaching temperatures of 200 to 250 degrees Celsius. This high-temperature process created chemical compounds that don't form in modern concrete, and it also left behind small, brittle pockets of unreacted, highly reactive lime. These pockets were the lime clasts. But here's the critical detail. The Romans understood perfectly that not all volcanic ash is equal. The Romans transported specific ash from the region of Pozzuoli near Naples, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away, to build structures across the Mediterranean.
Why?
Because that specific volcanic ash had the exact chemical composition needed. The pozzolana from Pozzuoli is rich in aluminum silicates in a perfect proportion. When mixed with lime and water, it creates a chemical reaction that forms uniquely stable compounds. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder and Seneca extensively documented the special properties of this ash. This shows us something important. The Romans weren't just following a recipe, they deeply understood the properties of their materials. They tested, experimented, and refined their formulas over centuries. This empirical knowledge, based on careful observation, was as sophisticated as our modern material science. The lime clasts weren't a mistake. They were a brilliantly engineered feature. They were a hidden reservoir of healing power, waiting patiently for the day they'd be needed. The Romans hadn't made a flawed material, they had made a smart material. They had invented self-healing concrete 2,000 years before we ever came up with the term. So, what was the function of these brittle little white chunks? This is where the true genius of the Romans reveals itself. The lime clasts are the heart of an automatic repair system. It's like the concrete has its own immune system. Here's how it works. Imagine a Roman wall at a microscopic level. First, a tiny crack begins to form, the same kind of crack that signals the beginning of the end for our concrete. Water from rain seeps into this fissure. Next, the water finds one of the millions of lime clasts. The water dissolves the reactive clast, creating a calcium-rich solution that flows into and floods the crack. Finally, the real transformation happens. This solution recrystallizes into calcium carbonate, effectively stitching the crack shut. But it also reacts with the surrounding volcanic ash, forming new, stable minerals that reinforce the repaired area. The crack isn't just plugged, it's healed. The wound becomes a scar as strong, or even stronger, than the original material. You might be thinking, this sounds too good to be true. And I thought the same thing. So, researchers at MIT put it to the test. Here's exactly what they did. They made 2 batches of concrete, one modern, one using the Roman hot mixing recipe. They then cracked both samples and ran water over them. The results were incredible. The cracks in the modern concrete stayed open, but the cracks in the Roman-style concrete had completely healed themselves within 2 weeks. 2 weeks of autonomous healing, with no human intervention required. This is the genius of the old masters' approach. Our philosophy is to make concrete resist damage. The Roman philosophy was to accept that damage is inevitable and build in a system to repair it. They didn't just build for strength, they built for resilience. Now that we understand the Roman secret, the flaw in our approach becomes painfully obvious. As we said, the problem is the steel rebar. We designed a system where the concrete's main job is to protect the steel from rust, but concrete is porous, and it's destined to fail at that job. Over time, carbon dioxide from the air seeps in and slowly neutralizes the concrete, breaking down the protective alkaline shield around the steel. Once water and salt reach the now unprotected rebar, rust begins, and the self-destruction feedback loop kicks in. When a crack forms in Roman concrete, it's an opportunity for healing. When a crack forms in our concrete, it's a death sentence. Our obsession with speed makes it worse. Modern concrete is designed to harden in just 28 days. This is great for project deadlines, but terrible for durability, as it creates more internal stresses and microcracks right from the start. Roman concrete cured much more slowly, developing its strength over a longer period, resulting in a more stable final product. Their philosophy was one of patience. Ours is one focused on the next fiscal quarter. We traded eternity for efficiency. Let's talk about the real cost of this systematic failure, and it's not just money, though that's astronomical. In the United States alone, we spend over $125 billion per year just maintaining and repairing concrete infrastructure. That's more than the entire GDP of many countries, and that number is growing. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates we need $4.5 trillion over the next 10 years just to bring our existing infrastructure to an acceptable state. Bridges are failing, parking garages are collapsing, and coastal structures are disintegrating, but the environmental cost is even more devastating. As we mentioned, cement production creates 8% of global carbon dioxide emissions, but here's what that really means. If the cement industry were a country, it would be the world's 3rd largest emitter, behind only China and the United States. And because our structures last only decades instead of millennia, we're trapped in a vicious cycle. Demolish, rebuild, demolish again. Each cycle releases more carbon and consumes more resources, sinking us deeper into an environmental crisis. The Romans built once, and it lasted 2,000 years. We rebuild every 50 years. Do the math. That's 40 times more material, 40 times more energy, and 40 times more emissions for the same functionality. For centuries, this knowledge was seen as a historical curiosity, but that's changing fast. Scientists are now in a race to reverse engineer this 2,000-year-old technology for the 21st century. Admir Mazik's team has already started a company to commercialize Roman-inspired self-healing concrete. The idea isn't to replace our modern materials entirely, but to enhance them with this ancient wisdom. Imagine building bridges, tunnels, or buildings that have a design life of centuries, not decades, infrastructure that requires dramatically less repair. The economic savings would be in the billions. Then there's the environmental impact. Cement production accounts for a staggering 8% of global carbon dioxide emissions. This Roman-inspired process is less energy-intensive because it requires lower temperatures than modern Portland cement production, about 2/3 of the heat needed for traditional cement. More importantly, if our structures last 10 times longer, we need to produce far less cement for replacements. This could be one of the biggest steps we take toward making construction sustainable. But the innovation doesn't stop with the Roman recipe. The race to reinvent concrete is happening right now, and some solutions are surprisingly creative. Scientists have developed concrete with living bacteria. Yes, you heard that right. They incorporate dormant bacterial spores, usually Bacillus species, directly into the concrete during mixing. When a crack forms and water enters, the spores wake up. The bacteria begin feeding on calcium lactate, which is also mixed into the concrete, and produce limestone as a byproduct. This limestone fills the crack from the inside out, healing the damage autonomously. Other companies are using a different approach. Special aggregates filled with healing agents that are released only when the concrete cracks. Researchers at the University of Southern California created hollow particles that burst under stress, releasing materials that chemically react to seal the fissure. And there's even concrete that uses conductive carbon fibers to detect damage through changes in electrical resistance, essentially giving concrete a nervous system that can alert engineers to problems before they become catastrophic. The challenge is cost. Bacterial concrete can cost 3 to 5 times more than traditional concrete initially, but when you consider it could last 100 to 200 years instead of 50 and factor in maintenance savings and reduced environmental impact, the calculation changes dramatically. Of course, there are challenges to widespread adoption. The specific volcanic ash the Romans used isn't available everywhere. Researchers are now working on creating synthetic versions, or using industrial byproducts like fly ash from coal plants to mimic it. There's also the inertia of the construction industry, which is built around speed and upfront costs rather than life cycle thinking. But the movement has begun. So, there you have it. The secret to concrete that lasts isn't some unobtainable magic. Roman concrete was smarter. It was alive with a potential for healing that we traded away for short-term strength and construction speed. They embedded resilience into their material, while we embedded a fatal flaw. For centuries, we wondered how they built things that lasted. Now we finally know, and with that knowledge, we have the chance to do more than just admire them. We have a chance to learn from them. By combining ancient wisdom with modern science, we are on the verge of building a future that is truly meant to last. The choice is ours. Continue down the path of disposable infrastructure that crumbles in decades and poisons our planet with emissions, or learn from the masters who built for eternity. We've been building our entire modern world on infrastructure designed to fail. Every bridge you cross, every building you enter, every parking garage you park in is slowly self-destructing from the inside out, and we just accepted this as normal. Think about that for a second. We normalized planned obsolescence, not just for our phones and appliances, but for the very foundation of our civilization. The Romans built the Pantheon once. 2,000 years later, it still stands. We've rebuilt most of our bridges and highways multiple times in just the last 50 years. Imagine the trillions of dollars we'd have saved if we just built them right the first time. Imagine the billions of tons of carbon dioxide never released. Imagine the millions of hours sitting in traffic while crews patch crumbling infrastructure that wouldn't need patching. But here's the thing. Concrete isn't the only material where we completely lost the plot. Medieval blacksmiths knew how to make iron that never rusted. Medieval carpenters built with wood that lasted centuries, not years. They understood something fundamental about durability that we've forgotten. The difference? They built things once properly. We build things fast, cheaply, and then rebuild them over and over and over again. We traded permanence for profit margins and craftsmanship for quarterly earnings. And the craziest part is that the knowledge to fix this isn't lost. It's just ignored. Companies that could revolutionize construction with self-healing concrete exist right now. The bacterial concrete, the Roman hot mixing technique, the sustainable alternatives, they're all proven. They work. But the industry moves slow because the current broken system is profitable for someone. So what do? We learn, we share this knowledge, and we demand better. Medieval iron that never rusted versus modern iron that crumbles in months. Would that lasted 800 years versus would that rots in a decade? These aren't just cool historical facts. These are techniques some people are using today to make things that actually last. You're driving across a bridge that was built a mere 40 years ago. Yet, you see rust stains seeping through the concrete, chunks missing, and cracks spiderwebbing across the surface. You can't help but wonder, is this even safe? Meanwhile, in Rome, the Pantheon's dome, constructed without a single reinforcing steel bar, has stood strong for nearly 2,000 years. Earthquakes, floods, and the relentless passage of time haven't even left a scratch. For over 13 centuries after the Roman Empire's fall, it reigned as the largest dome in the world. It remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome ever built. So, here's a question that should be keeping engineers up at night. Why do our expensive, modern projects begin to crumble within decades, while ancient Roman structures remain pristine for millennia? What secrets did the Romans possess that we've forgotten? Many people question why ancient structures appear to last forever, while our modern constructions seem almost disposable. This isn't merely nostalgia. There's a fundamental difference between the concrete of the past and the concrete we use today. The core issue lies in a critical flaw that we've engineered into our own designs. We live in a concrete age. It's the second most utilized substance on Earth, just behind water. It's the very foundation upon which our world is built. Our homes, skyscrapers, and highways all rely on it. However, we've built this world on a material with a surprisingly short lifespan. Modern concrete boasts incredible compressive strength, meaning it can withstand immense pressure. This makes it perfect for pillars, but it's weak when subjected to pulling or bending forces, exhibiting poor tensile strength. The supposed solution, a brilliant 19th century innovation, was reinforced concrete. The concept is straightforward. Encase the vulnerable concrete in a skeleton of steel bars, known as rebar. The concrete handles the compressive forces, while the steel tackles the tensile forces. Together, they create a super material, and for a time, it seemed to work. But a huge problem lurked beneath the surface. We unknowingly embedded a self-destruct mechanism within the very core of our creations, the steel itself.
Here's the reason why.
Concrete appears solid, but it's actually porous, like a hardened sponge. Over time, tiny cracks begin to form. Water, oxygen, and salt from winter road treatments seep through these cracks, eventually reaching the steel. When they do, a chemical reaction begins: rust. Let's delve into the exact numbers involved in this problem, because they're truly terrifying. When the steel rebar corrodes, the resulting rust expands to occupy 5 to 10 times the volume of the original steel. Take a moment to consider that, for every cubic centimeter of steel that transforms into rust, up to 10 cubic centimeters of expansive material attempt to escape. This rust exerts a pressure of 3 to 4 megapascals on the surrounding concrete. While concrete has excellent compressive strength, its tensile strength, its ability to withstand pulling or stretching, is only about 10% of its compressive strength. So, we have a perfect storm for disaster. A massive expansive force attacking the material's weakest point. It's akin to trying to contain an internal explosion. And once the first chunk of concrete breaks loose, the process accelerates exponentially. The now exposed rebar corrodes even faster, generating more rust, which creates more pressure, leading to further spalling. It's a destructive feedback loop. Here's the ironic part. We add rebar to strengthen the concrete, but without adequate protection, it becomes the very mechanism of the structure's destruction. This is called spalling. A tiny crack becomes a large one, chunks fall off, and the entire structure starts tearing itself apart from within. We find ourselves in a strange predicament, using a material that's designed to fail. We're locked in a ruinously expensive battle against the inevitable decay of the very substance we've chosen to build our world with. What if there was a better way? What if the answer wasn't adding more steel, but looking to the past? To uncover the secret to immortal concrete, we must become detectives, studying the clues left behind by Rome's master builders. Our first stop is the Pantheon. That massive, 142-foot dome contains no steel rebar at all. By modern standards, it shouldn't be as durable as it is. It defies the logic of our own material science. And it's not just the Pantheon. Journey to the Italian coast, to the ancient harbor of Caesarea. Roman engineers constructed huge concrete piers directly into the rough sea. Modern concrete in that environment can fail in just a few decades. Yet, parts of these Roman structures remain standing after 2,000 years submerged in salt water. Pause for a moment and let that sink in. Concrete that is stronger after 2,000 years submerged in salt water. It defies everything we know about corrosion. How is that even possible? This is where things get interesting. Research shows that the seawater didn't destroy the concrete. It actually made it stronger over time. When seawater penetrates Roman concrete, it dissolves the lime within. But instead of weakening the structure, this triggers an extraordinary chemical reaction. The dissolved lime reacts with the volcanic ash in the mix, forming crystals of a rare mineral called aluminum tobermorite, also known as altobermorite. These crystals don't just fill gaps. They create an interlocking structure of microscopic plates that reinforce the material. Researchers at the University of Utah discovered that these crystals continue to grow for millennia, filling pores, strengthening bonds, and creating an increasingly resilient structure. It's as if the concrete has an immune system that strengthens with each attack from the saltwater.